So first of all, I just would like to acknowledge that I'm very excited to be part of Forward Fest. This presentation, if you weren't aware, is part of Forward Fest, Wisconsin's largest entrepreneurship and technology and ideas uh, um, conference and series of workshops. Since it's totally virtual this year, I know that it's become international instead of just Wisconsin participants. And so that is a really cool experience to be a part of. And I wanted to take a moment and thank all of the wonderful sponsors who have made this experience possible for this free and virtual event. So you can see on your screen there a few really wonderful sponsors, and then I'm going to move on and show one more screen with more logos of really great companies that are making this whole experience possible. So thank you very much to these generous sponsors. All right, I'm going to put up my PowerPoint. Oh, and I was practicing right before we started, so there we go. I'm going to put up my PowerPoint slides here. And I know the way I'm sharing my screen, I'm going to try to move this over just a little bit. Okay, great. So I'm going to spend the time this morning, it'll be less than half an hour, just to share some information, questions, and stuff that we're seeing within the travel industry these days, especially pertinent to business travel. If you could please stay muted, this presentation is recorded, and so please use that chat function. I'll keep an eye on it, and then for sure, after I'm done presenting, I'll look through and address any of those comments or questions, and we can also, at the end of the presentation, go off from mute and have a live conversation. But just to kind of keep things flowing, we'll keep you on mute for now, and please use the chat function. All right, so just to start a little bit about Burkhalter Travel. We are a full service travel company that we've been around for over 60 years. You can see in that top left-hand photo there, my father-in-law, Ed Manny, who was sitting in that front row with the sunglasses on. This was actually a really amazing adventure to Alaska that we had as a family last summer. And so I like sharing that photo. I also have in here photos on the bottom that reflect the other types of travel that we help individuals and companies with. We're here for your meetings and incentive trip travel programs. We're here for your fabulous leisure vacation trips. And we're also here to help with your business travel program needs, whether it's, you know, doing the research and creating your reservations, or helping you manage your program, leveraging your spend. And that's the area that I direct. Just a little bit more. We are headquartered here in Madison, Wisconsin. We've got 9 locations, mostly in southern Wisconsin, 1 in Iowa. We work with a lot of wonderful companies in the Wisconsin area, including Sub-Zero and Task. Since this is an international festival, I'll help pinpoint Madison for you if you're not familiar. If you're not from around here, Madison is about 2-hour drive north of Chicago. And then I chose to share this photo of me. This is also part of that Alaska trip last summer, doing a helicopter hike in Denali, which was such a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But I chose this because this is a very personal place in my heart. My dad was in the Army, and so I lived in a lot of different places, and no place is really considered home for me. But my childhood was in Alaska. We were there for 6 years. It's where I started school. It's where most of my childhood memories are from. So this is just a little bit about me. And I came to the business travel program through many different things in my career. I got my MBA here first from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. It's the first time I moved to Madison. And I just have been working on different types of collaborations with businesses throughout my career, in which the fun and the dynamism of how travel is always changing really attracted me to the role. Okay. So for today's discussion, I wanted to try to address what are the questions that you guys are all having? And so I did a survey, and I surveyed my business travel customers and I surveyed connections on LinkedIn. And it turns out the types of questions that people have about business travel are very similar to the types of questions that people have about just travel in general, whether it's traveling for vacation or traveling for that really important work meeting. And so I took those questions and feedbacks and ideas, and I framed this discussion around five questions. How should I make my decision whether or not to travel? Who is traveling right now and what has their experience been? Is it safe to travel? What travel restrictions will I face if I try to travel? And when will these restrictions be lifted? And finally, how may business travel fundamentally change? And so I don't have black and white answers to any of these. Obviously, this is such unprecedented times, but I just wanted to share some insights from what we're seeing in the industry and what we're hearing from folks. And that last question about how things might fundamentally change, it's one that I think about quite a bit. I mentioned my dad was in the Army. He's from North Dakota. He met my mom in South Korea when he was stationed there. And when the pandemic really started to hit our shores, my mom gave me a call. And she didn't say, how are you doing? Are you okay? I'm so sorry you're in the travel industry. Things are so tough right now. She just simply said, this is a time to learn. This is a time of growth. Her family lost everything in the Korean War, and they moved to the big city and they rebuilt. And so rebuilding it's part of human nature. It's part of our indomitable spirits. And so it's just something I reflect on quite a bit. Okay. All right, so that first question there of how should I make my decision whether or not to travel? When you think about it from a company perspective, there are companies that are restricting all travel right now, so decision made for you. There are companies where all travel actually is allowed, and so you are to continue going on with your goals and your travel related to it as normal. And then there are 43% of companies that are in between, where some travel is allowed and some travel is not. So there's some ambiguity there, and that's some of what we'll dig into in this presentation. All right. So who is traveling right now and what's their experience been? From my survey, about 20% of the respondents are traveling right now. They're mostly driving their own cars, right? They're trying to pick the least exposure, a travel opportunity. We do have a fair number, and then there are many who are staying in hotels. And then we still do have 40% of respondents saying that they're renting cars and they're also flying. When I probed on what types of travel is permitted, if there's some restrictions at the company, folks were sharing that, I'm sorry, I'm going to move this over just in case my screen is blocking that. All right. That travel is permitted for emergency technical assistance. So if there's a great urgency to why the travel is needed, people who are saying, I'm not really sure, it's sort of gray. So we're allowed to, and we're supposed to make a judgment on what's essential and what's not. If there's an important customer meeting that's important for the company, and also a lot of comments about their new levels of approvals that are being needed right now. So you are not making the decision just on your own. There's a supervisor and maybe a supervisor's supervisor who is helping to manage that decision about what's essential, what's needed right now. And the interesting thing about that approval process is companies are handling that in different ways. Some are requiring a pre-trip approval, and so that's happening before the reservation process even starts. Others are letting it work through a travel management company like me as part of the reservation process. All right. And then I asked them, for that 20% who are traveling, what's your experience been? And I got a lot of comments back about that in general, that they felt safe, that the safety protocols being used at this is their opinion, safety protocols being used at airports and in airplanes very much met their expectations, that they felt like it was cleaner with more social distancing and masking than, say, driving and stopping at rest stops or gas stations. that when they went to go meet with another business contact, that the company they were visiting was following what they felt like was the right level of safety protocols. So everyone was protecting each other. And then it's interesting, I keep hearing this comparison between travel and, well, what is this like compared to my grocery store, my Walmart, my Target? And I heard some anecdotal feedback from people that they actually felt safer in those airports and airplanes. And then I did get this comment at the very bottom about someone who did not feel comfortable and did not feel safe. All right. So let's talk about safety. This is probably going to be one of the most ambiguous parts of the conversation because this question about is air travel, how safe is air travel these days in particular, it seems to be the biggest question people have. There are no scientific studies, right, saying that air travel is safer, is an 8 on safety compared to Walmart, which is a whatever number, doesn't exist. And so the way I approached trying to help bring some insights into this question was to look at, well, what information is available about what safety protocols are working the best these days, and where transmission is happening. So it seems to come down to masking is probably the most important, short of us all completely just staying in our home and our lives coming to a grinding halt, that if there are these essential activities that we need to be part of, masking is the most important requirement. And there have been numerous studies that are helping to validate that. So I thought this article from that was posted as part of a UC Davis discussion showed that masking reduced risk by 65%. This was looking at studies in over 170. These were over 170 studies in many countries around the world. And just the wearing of the mask made a huge difference. And then I thought this one about people in a home. And so we've got 3 or 4 or 5 family members in there. One of them became infected, but they were all wearing masks. The masking was 79% effective at preventing the other family members from getting COVID. So that seems pretty powerful to me. So airlines are being very, very strict about the wearing of masks. There is not really leeway there. And so that's a huge safety measure. And then one other thing, you'll hear people talk about these HEPA filters that are filtering the air within the airplane. So that's probably the part of the journey people might be the most interested in learning more about, because you're in a confined space for however many hours. And so these filters, these HEPA filters, the reason why airlines are touting that they are used as part of airplane protocols is because they pull out over 99% of the airborne particles that help transmit illnesses. And hospitals, for example, use these types of filters when they've got a measles case. So no scientific study right now proving how much that reduces your risk, but we're just trying to look for comparables right now where it's such a new pandemic for us to be dealing with. We're looking for comparables, and that was one. Okay. And then, so there's safety, and then there are restrictions. Once I get onto a plane and I reach my destination, will I be able to move about freely? Will I be able to return home freely? There's a huge worry about quarantines, and very legitimately, right? A lot of my job in March was rescuing stranded travelers who, when they started their journey, there was no travel restriction or travel ban. And in the middle of it, it turned like a dime, and they had about 24 hours advance notice to get out of the country. And so we're all pretty scarred by those experiences. And we just want to make sure that thinking about what the travel restrictions are part of our planning process. The International Air Trade Association did research on people's opinions about these and about air travel, and the quarantines were a top concern. 85% were very worried about them, and 17% won't travel if there's a risk of quarantine. As I think about travel restrictions, there's really 2 areas that I saw the most questions. It was divided between domestic and international. So let's take a look at one way of looking at the domestic travel restrictions that are in place. So I thought this was a really good article from Forbes about what types of quarantine measures and restrictions are in place in different states in the United States, and then what are the penalties and what does enforcement look like. And so, here are just a few examples, and I really want to reinforce that you should do your research before you do any travel, because it's a situation that's constantly changing. You can't take information from this week and apply it to 2 weeks from now, because the situation will change again. So here are a few examples. New York, which went through such a tough time with the pandemic, has both penalties and has a lot of statements from the very top that they are very, willing to enforce them. Hawaii, this island ecosystem, there are documented cases of people facing penalties and one arrest from someone who repeatedly violated the mandatory quarantine. Alaska has a very high maximum penalty that can be allowed through their travel restrictions, but the governor is saying that he's really going to rely on voluntary compliance. He doesn't want to be heavy-handed. And then there's this really interesting case of a lot of states like New Jersey and Maryland and Ohio that have quarantines or restrictions, but they have no penalty that go with them. So it's a very mixed bag in the United States. It's very different state by state. And then as we look internationally, the most common question that I get is about Europe. So what's happening in Europe and when will they welcome US residents again? It's going to be a coordinated decision. Every 2 weeks, the EU looks at which country residents are allowed to travel and which ones aren't. And so that it will change every 2 weeks. And they have 3 criteria that they're looking at. They're looking at the number of new cases as a percentage of population. And so do you have a number of new cases in your country that's similar or below what the EU is experiencing? The next point that people are looking at, what's the trend? Is the number of new cases going up or going down? Or is it stable? And then finally, what is the country's overall response? And so when they look at the overall response, they're looking at testing, surveillance, contact tracing, containment, treatment, reporting, reliability of info and data sources. So they're painting a comprehensive picture of how the pandemic is being managed by that country. So I don't know. There's a lot of factors there. And I mean, the bigger picture is we've just got to get this pandemic under control for more normalcy to return to all of our lives. And so that takes me to a vaccine. I think so I asked my survey participants what they thought about a vaccine. Would they be interested in getting it? And if so, when? The majority of respondents were most interested in getting the vaccine if there's one that's safely approved by the FDA, about 40% after it's been on the market for 6 months. They didn't want to get it right away, but after a certain amount of time. And then I did have a small percentage, I had a percentage of 24% that was either interested in not getting it its first year in the market, and then a very small percentage, 4%, of not interested in getting it at all. So these were my respondents. I know there are other studies out there, like a Gallup poll that said about 1 in 3 Americans weren't interested in getting the vaccine. So I'm interested to see in how, when there's a one that's approved to be released, what types of shifts we might have in how we look at it once it's not hypothetical, but something that's actually on the market, and what types of public health messaging campaigns will go along with it. Okay, all right. And so to that question about how they might fundamentally change that I had mentioned earlier was something I'm so interested in. During these strange times, it's a chance for us to all be looking at our activities and what's bringing the most value to our lives, to our businesses, to our families and communities, and which ones we have a chance to, rebuild in a better way. So first I asked, how are people able to meet their business goals, being grounded in this way, having restricted travel? And there were some who felt like they were creating even more results, 8%. 30% felt that they were about the same. The majority, though, nearly half, said that there are some goals that are really hard to reach. Yes, they can still accomplish some levels of productivity, but there's just some goals that are hard to reach right now. And then 12% who are completely frustrated that they just can't really get their jobs done in this environment. All right. And so in getting more detail about what types of goals people are struggling with the most, the top one, hands down, was developing new relationships. So a couple of quotes here. It's very hard to work with potential new customers. I usually travel internationally 9 months of the year. Right now, this limits company growth. New business is much harder to land without an in-person meeting. Someone else talked about Zoom fatigue. Sure, you can develop connections over Zoom, but then there's a point in which people struggle with just sitting and staring at that screen. Some of the other issues that people had were, you might be selling a product that it's a very tactile product, that the demonstration of it and being hands-on with it can really make or break your business opportunity. Here's one about collaboration that I thought was really interesting. So this person talked about, well, sometimes you have to bring parties from multiple states together, and through the Zoom, it's just not the same experience. And I definitely have been part of that. I used to work for the Nature Conservancy, and I got to be part of this really cool strategic initiative looking at the Great Lakes as a region and how do we collaborate to bring back more, more health, more ecological health to the Great Lakes as a system. Here's a big, audacious goal, very inspiring, and yet we're all kind of stuck in our own realities until we sit in a room together and know that, we made the investment in these 3 days, and at the end of these 3 days, we have to have some outcomes. There isn't that same type of pressure or inspiration when things have gone completely virtual. And then very simply too, some people, some of their business relies on trade shows, and those have been canceled. And then there are workplaces who are just not welcoming any external visitors right now. So they can't have those meetings right now. All right. So let's turn to looking at during these strange times in which we get to, reflect and think about what is it about right now that we would actually like to keep going forward. And the majority of respondents, over 80%, said that there were things that had gone virtual, meetings that had gone virtual, that they'd like to continue doing that way, that was an effective way for them. So as I asked about what types of meetings they would like to keep as virtual, the biggest response was team meetings. Over 90% said, yes, we can actually do those quite effectively virtually. The next biggest response, which I thought was very interesting, 2/3 said that trainings and workshops were pretty effective virtually. And I thought that was interesting because I thought that the, in-person learning opportunity, could make quite a difference, and it probably really depends on the field and what you're learning, but that there's some of that really can be effectively be done virtually. The lesser popular responses were current client meetings, and then prospective client meetings, those new relationships that we talked about before. All right. Okay. So this is my last slide, basically, and I just wanted to end this discussion with a little reflections about the time that we're in, and how I'm thinking about travel during these times in our future. I have a lot of team members who have been with the company during other big disruptions to travel. So after 9/11, when air travel was profoundly impacted during the 2008 recession, where the whole economy and travel in particular too was also very much impacted. And during those times, pundits were also saying, "Oh, it's never going to come back. Like things are permanently changed. You know, we're all just going to do Zoom meetings now." Very similar messaging during those times. And I mentioned there are things that I do hope we reflect on and change permanently during these times. But I actually, you know, our business experience and my personal belief is that travel is very resilient. For me, I think it's because there is a connection to people, to new ideas, to self-discoveries that are facilitated through travel that really isn't facilitated in the same way through anything else. Um, and so I'm going to leave you with this quote before we do questions from Brene Brown that I just love. And she had said, "I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from that relationship." And so as I think about that energy that can be created when people truly connect and they find a new way to work together, find a new way to, you know, care for each other, find a new way to be creative and innovative, um, there's just something about that. And I can't picture that same energy and that same uh, in-person experience being replicated any other way. So that's where I'm coming from. That's where I think, and I do think that this industry is very resilient, and you know, we will see our way forward just like we always have.